March 5th, 2026. The Iran war, shock, markets, law, and the new risk premium for a fracturing world. The world has entered a more dangerous phase of geopolitical risk, not merely a regional confrontation, but a stress test of international law, crisis diplomacy, and the global economy's ability to absorb shocks while still disinflating. Over the past week, the United States and Israel have escalated military operations against Iran in what US officials describe as a large-scale air campaign, while Iran has retaliated with drone and missile strikes across the region. Israeli officials have warned the conflict may be prolonged. At the United Nations, the confrontation has widened into a contest over self-defense, proportionality, and the credibility of the UN system. An independent UN investigation reported that the use of force by all parties violates the UN Charter's prohibition on force against another state's territorial integrity or political independence. Yet, the same architecture provides a narrow exception: the inherent right of self-defense if an armed attack occurs, pending Security Council action. That tension between Article 2.4 and Article 51 anchors the truly worrying erosion of international law, where narratives outpace adjudication. The economic question is not whether this war is local or global, it is whether it becomes systemic. Iran sits astride the Persian Gulf's strategic arteries, and markets are clearly sensitive to the Strait of Hormuz risk premium. Malaysian and regional media have highlighted war risk insurance costs as operators price physical danger, liability, and schedule disruption. For ASEAN, trade exposed and energy import dependent in several member states, this is an inflation story, a supply chain story, and a strategic autonomy story. The IMF's January 2026 World Economic Outlook Update projects global growth around 3.3% in 2026 and flags escalation and disruption to major shipping routes as downside risks that can lift costs and commodity prices. Wars do not need to shut down the global economy to change it. They need only raise uncertainty enough to reprice risk, delay investment, and keep inflation sticky through energy and transport. Energy markets are, in theory, better cushioned than in shocks. The International Energy Agency's February 2026 oil market reporting points to supply growth and the likelihood of a surplus in 2026 under baseline assumptions. Yet baselines are fragile in wartime. Even if physical barrels are not removed, logistics, insurance, and inventory financing costs can surge. Financial markets respond in phases. First comes reflex, flight to safety, and volatility spikes. Then comes strategy. Investors assess whether the conflict will change central bank reaction functions, defense, industrial demand, commodity regimes, and the sanctions map. Washington Post reporting highlights concern about the pace of US consumption of precision-guided munitions and air defense interceptors, an operational detail that can become a macro detail if it drives supplemental budgets. The implication is that the risk-free rate may no longer be politically risk-free when geopolitics pressures fiscal paths. Trade policy is another transmission channel. The global economy was already navigating tariff frictions and industrial policy competition. ASEAN commentary in Malaysia's mainstream press has warned that unilateral tariff measures combined with Middle East conflict risks can challenge regional stability and reinforce the need for diversification and resilience. Practically, ASEAN economies must treat geopolitics as a permanent variable, expand RCEP utilization, deepen intra-ASEAN supply chains, and diversify critical inputs and export destinations, without mistaking diversification for decoupling. For Malaysia and ASEAN, the policy agenda is pragmatic. Treat energy security as competitiveness, diversify supply sources, and accelerate renewable and efficiency programs that reduce exposure to imported price spikes. Build logistics resilience to manage higher shipping and insurance costs assume geopolitical volatility in inflation forecasting, and avoid overreactions that undermine investor confidence. Diplomatically, ASEAN's advantage is convening power. A credible, rules-based stance supporting de-escalation, humanitarian access, and international legal processes can strengthen the bloc's standing. The hardest truth is institutional. International law is only as strong as states' willingness to be constrained by it. When major actors normalize expansive interpretations of self-defense or treat legal review as an afterthought, the system becomes more permissive until costs return as wider conflict and higher risk premiums. A practical path forward begins with narrowing objectives and widening diplomacy, ceasefire mechanisms, monitored humanitarian corridors, and credible third-party facilitation that creates off-ramps for all sides. Markets can price risk. They cannot manufacture legitimacy, and legitimacy anchored in law, transparency, and restraint ultimately lowers the cost of capital for everyone. Thank you all for tuning in and supporting my podcast news channel. Your time, attention, and engagement truly mean a great deal. I sincerely appreciate your continued support and thoughtful viewership. Join, follow, like, and share.